I thought I was getting a great deal at a yard sale. An old mirror, dusty but beautiful, something straight out of a Victorian mansion. But the moment I hung it up, everything changed. Strange whispers, shadows in the reflection, and the feeling of someone or something watching me. The mirror was more than just a piece of antique furniture. It was a doorway, and I had opened it. It all started on a sunny Saturday morning when I was scouring a yard sale down the street. I had never been much of a yard sale person. Too much junk, too many odd items. But this one was different. The house was old, worn down, and the front yard was scattered with vintage knickknacks. The air smelled like stale wood and the faint scent of forgotten memories. Something drew me in, though I couldn't say exactly what it was. Then I saw it. Leaning against a rickety wooden table, partially covered by an old sheet, was an antique mirror. The frame was ornate, gold and detailed, with intricate swirls that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. The glass itself was slightly fogged, but I could see through the haze, reflecting my own face in its surface. A man in his late 60s stood behind the table, looking bored. "How much for the mirror?" I asked, already feeling the strange pull of it. He glanced up, eyes squinting, as though seeing me for the first time. $50. 50? I repeated, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. The mirror was easily worth several hundred, maybe more. "I'll take it." He shrugged. "It's a family heirloom. Been in my family for generations. My grandmother always said it had a presence." He chuckled dryly, as if the words were just a joke, but something in his voice made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off and handed him the money. As I loaded it into my car, I didn't think much about the man's words. Presence? Probably just superstition. That night, after I hung the mirror in my living room, something felt off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. The room looked fine, well lit, cozy. But the mirror, it seemed to dominate the space. Even though it was just a reflection, something about it felt unnatural. I brushed off the growing unease, telling myself it was just the oddness of the new piece of furniture. But as the hours wore on, it became harder to ignore. I began hearing strange sounds, whispers, soft and distant at first, like voices in another room. I convinced myself it was the wind, the house settling. But then I noticed something. The shadows in the mirror didn't match the ones in the room. I stood there, frozen, staring at my reflection. It was normal, except for one thing. There was a shadow moving behind me. I whipped around, heart racing, but no one was there. I turned back to the mirror. The shadow was gone. My reflection was exactly the same as it had been before. I chalked it up to fatigue. Maybe I was just imagining things, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next few days were a blur of unease. I tried to ignore the mirror, but it was always there, looming over everything. In the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of something in its reflection. Sometimes I'd see a dark figure standing just outside the frame, as if peering into the room. Other times, it was like the mirror itself was alive, shifting, warping. I couldn't make sense of it. Then, one night, the whispers grew louder. The voices were clearer now, calling my name. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, but they weren't just whispers. They were commands, soft, sinister, like a lullaby, but with a dark edge. "Come closer." I tried to ignore it, but the pull was overwhelming. I approached the mirror, my feet moving as if guided by some unseen force. As I got closer, the reflection shifted again. I saw her, a woman, pale and gaunt, standing in the background of the reflection. She was staring directly at me, her eyes hollow, her face twisted in a horrific smile. I stumbled back, gasping, but the image remained in the mirror, clear as day. I ran out of the room and shut the door, heart racing in panic. But I couldn't shake the image of her face, burned into my mind. I knew then that I couldn't keep the mirror, but there was no way to get rid of it. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences grew more violent. Objects would move in the reflection without me touching them. Furniture would shift, and sometimes I would hear the sound of footsteps echoing from behind me. But no one was ever there. Finally, I decided to confront the previous owner. I went back to the yard sale house, determined to get some answers. The man was sitting on the front porch, smoking a cigarette. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You came for answers, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded. "What's wrong with the mirror? Why does it feel like something's wrong with it?" The man stared at me for a long moment, his face turning pale. "It's not just a mirror. It's a doorway. It's been in my family for generations, passed down from one to the next. Each owner has seen the same things you have, and it's always the same woman. My grandmother said she was cursed, a spirit that lives in the glass. Once you open that door, you can't close it. She'll follow you." I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in. "What happened to the last person who owned it?" "They vanished," he said quietly. "They were never seen again. I tried everything to get rid of the mirror. I covered it, put it in storage, even tried to burn it. But nothing worked. The woman's face was always there, staring at me in the reflection, always closer. I'm not sure what to believe anymore. Was it all in my head, or was the mirror truly haunted? All I know is that whatever force resides within it is real, and it has followed me. Now I can't sleep, can't look in any reflective surface without seeing her face in the glass. You may think I'm crazy, but if you ever come across a mirror like the one I bought, don't take it, no matter the price. Some things are better left undisturbed." I never planned on going to that yard sale. I'd driven by the house dozens of times, but something about that Saturday morning felt different. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the yard, casting long shadows across the clutter of old furniture and trinkets. I was just out for a stroll, killing time, when I spotted the table stacked with random items, books, old dishes, a couple of dusty records, and there it was, tucked in the corner of the yard, a small wooden box, worn and heavy. It was oddly out of place. Everything else on the table looked like junk, but this box, it had an air of importance about it. The wood was darkened by age, the corners rounded from years of use. There was a faded label on the top, but the writing was illegible. I picked it up without thinking. It felt oddly warm in my hands, like it was alive, like it had been waiting for me. The woman hosting the yard sale, an older lady with graying hair, caught my eye. "You like that box?" she asked in a voice that cracked with age. I nodded, feeling drawn to it. $10, she said, her tone suddenly shifting. "But I warn you, some things, they aren't meant to be kept." I chuckled nervously, assuming it was just a quirky remark. I handed over the cash, and she smiled, almost knowingly, as she handed me the box. That night, As I sat on my couch, the box still in my lap, I couldn't help but wonder about its contents. Why had I bought it? I didn't even need another antique piece cluttering my apartment. But the curiosity gnawed at me, and finally, I opened it. Inside was an assortment of things. Old photographs, faded letters, small trinkets. At first glance, it seemed like a random collection of someone's life. But the moment I touched one of the photographs, something shifted in me. The woman in the photo looked familiar. Too familiar. It was a picture of a young woman standing outside what looked like a house I'd been to, the house I grew up in. I pulled out another photograph. This time, it was a family photo. A man, a woman, 2 children. The odd thing was that the faces were blurred, but I knew I had seen those faces before. My heart started to race. I couldn't understand why, but the more I looked at the photos, the more I felt a deep sense of déjà vu. Then I found the letters. They were all addressed to someone named Lillian, written in a handwriting that I could swear I recognized. The contents were strange, almost cryptic. One letter read, "Don't forget what we've done. They'll be watching. Don't let them find the box." Another one was a simple message. "The house is still watching you. You can't escape it." I couldn't breathe. Lillian. That name. Why did it sound so familiar? I had never known anyone by that name. Had I? The following night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The box seemed to call to me, pulling me back. I decided to go through it again, hoping to make sense of what I had found. This time, when I lifted the lid, I felt a cold chill run through me. There was something different about the box. Something had shifted. I reached in, pulling out a small leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, as if it had been handled many times. I opened it, and my hands froze. The journal contained entries that described events in my life, details no one could have known, things I had never told a soul. The entries described my childhood home, a house I hadn't thought about in years. But the most chilling part was the mention of a room I had never spoken of, an attic room in my parents' house, a room I hadn't seen in years, not since I was a child. I felt dizzy. There was no way this journal was about me. It couldn't be. I hadn't lived in that house in years, and the events described in the journal were, well, they were too precise, too accurate. I stared at the last entry, my blood running cold. Lillian has come. She'll be here soon. The box must remain hidden. She must never know. I slammed the journal shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. Who was Lillian? And why did I feel like I had to hide this box from someone? But even as I asked myself those questions, I felt a presence in the room, as if something or someone was watching me. I turned, half expecting to see someone standing behind me, but no one was there. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the attic. I had to go back. I needed answers. I drove to my parents' house, my heart racing the whole way. They had sold the place years ago, but I knew the new owners. After some awkward pleasantries, I managed to convince them to let me up into the attic. When I climbed the stairs to that old, dusty room, a wave of nausea hit me. It was the same room I had seen in the journal, the one I had tried so hard to forget. I stepped inside, and everything felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I was about to turn back when I saw it. In the far corner of the attic, hidden behind some old furniture, was a box. The same box. It was exactly like the one I had bought, only this one was much older, its edges cracked with age. I reached for it, trembling. As my fingers brushed the surface, the world seemed to tilt. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, and a voice, low and distant, whispered in my ear, "You shouldn't have opened it." I spun around, but there was no one there. The house felt alive, suffocating, and I realized too late that I had been drawn into something much darker than I could ever understand. Back at my apartment, I researched everything I could about the box, the letters, the name Lillian. It turns out the box had a dark history. It once belonged to a woman named Lillian Shaw, an infamous figure from my family's past. She had been obsessed with the occult, collecting personal belongings and journals from everyone she had encountered, even from my own ancestors. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized something terrifying. Lillian wasn't dead. She was still out there, and she knew where I lived. I thought I was getting a great deal at a thrift store. An old porcelain doll, antique, a little creepy, but nothing too strange. But once I brought her home, everything changed. At night, she would move. First, it was small things. A shift in her position, a change in her expression. But then, one night, I woke up to find her standing in the hallway, staring at me. And that was just the beginning of something far worse. It was a regular Saturday afternoon when I stumbled into that thrift store. The kind of place you visit when you're looking for something old, something with character, nothing fancy, just stuff that people had tossed aside. I wasn't expecting anything special, but then I saw her. Sitting on a dusty shelf in the corner, almost hidden behind some old books, was a porcelain doll. She was beautifully crafted, with pale, cracked skin and soft blonde curls. Her eyes were glassy, blue, unsettlingly so. She looked like she belonged in a Victorian-era house, yet there was something wrong about her, something I couldn't place. The price was a steal, so I thought, why not? I took her to the counter, paid, and brought her home. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another quirky item for my living room. I set her on the mantelpiece, positioned her carefully so she'd face the room. Her glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I walked away, but I shrugged it off. She was just a doll, after all. The first night was uneventful. I went to bed, tired from the day, and slept like a rock. But when I woke up the next morning, something was off. The doll had moved. I'm not talking about a subtle shift in her position. I'm talking about a significant change. She had been facing forward when I placed her on the mantel, but now she was turned slightly to the right. Her head was cocked, almost like she was staring at something, or someone. I shrugged it off. Maybe I hadn't put her in the right place. Maybe the vibrations from walking across the room had caused her to shift. It wasn't impossible, but as the days went on, the movements became more pronounced. Every morning, the doll was in a slightly different position. Sometimes she was turned to face the wall. Other times, her hands would be in different positions, as if she had been holding something in her invisible grip. And each time, her eyes seemed to be more focused, more aware. I couldn't explain it, but I didn't want to think about it too much. I'd heard the stories. Old dolls are creepy, sure, but they're just that, stories, right? The real turning point came a week later. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I felt a sudden chill in the air. I glanced up toward the mantel, where the doll usually sat. She was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd moved her and forgotten about it. But when I checked the living room, the kitchen, even the bathroom, I couldn't find her. My heart rate quickened. Where could she be? I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, and that's when I saw her. Standing in the middle of the hallway, facing my bedroom door, was the doll. Her glass eyes glinted in the dim light of the hallway, her head tilted at a strange angle. My breath caught in my throat. I froze. The doll hadn't just moved. She had walked. There was no other explanation. I walked up to her slowly, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I had left her there. Maybe I hadn't noticed. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I picked her up, feeling the cold porcelain against my hands. As I turned to head back to the living room, I felt a strange pressure on my back, like someone was standing just behind me. I spun around. There was nothing there. I rushed to my room, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind, made me feel like I wasn't alone, like something was in the room with me. The next morning, I woke up to find the doll back on the mantel. I could have sworn I had left her in my bedroom the night before, but there she was, exactly where she had been days before. Her expression had changed, though. The once serene look had turned into something menacing. Her lips were curled into the faintest smile, but it wasn't a pleasant one. It was cold, predatory, like she knew something I didn't. I couldn't stand it any longer. I decided to take the doll back to the thrift store. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was alive, that she was somehow following me. I got in my car, drove to the store, and handed the doll back to the old woman who had sold her to me. I explained what had been happening, my voice shaking. She listened silently, then said something I'll never forget. "You shouldn't have bought her," she said, her voice quiet. "She doesn't stay with anyone for long." I didn't understand what she meant, but the words left a knot in my stomach. I walked out of the store, relieved to be rid of the doll, hoping I could finally be free of whatever had been happening. That night, I was lying in bed, finally feeling at peace, when I heard a faint noise coming from the living room. It sounded like something shifting, moving. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. I got up, walked quietly to the hallway, and peeked into the living room. The doll was back on the mantel, exactly where she had been when I first bought her. But this time, her eyes were wide open, and she was smiling. Her smile twisted, as if mocking me. I froze, my blood running cold. How had she gotten back here? I rushed to the mantel to pick her up, but as soon as my hands touched her, the house went deathly still. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. I backed away slowly, holding the doll at arm's length. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Leave me." I dropped the doll. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, but before I could move, the doll stood up. I don't know how long I've been here, hiding from the doll. I can hear her moving through the house, her porcelain feet tapping softly against the floors. The strange woman at the thrift store had warned me, but I never should have ignored it. Now, I know. There are some things, some objects that can't be moved. Some things that never let you go once you've touched them. I don't know if anyone will find this. I don't know if I'll ever be able to leave. But if you ever find a doll like the one I bought, no matter how innocent it looks, no matter how cute it seems, don't touch it. Some dolls won't stay put for a reason.